I've always believed that the world is too wide and too mysterious to remain in one place. Ever since I was old enough to save my own money, I poured it into plane tickets, train rides, and bus fares that carried me far from home. At 25, I had already seen more than most people twice my age. I'd walked the cobblestone streets of Europe, marveled at Gothic cathedrals, and sat in tiny cafes where the air smelled of roasted beans and warm bread. I'd crossed part of Africa, where the earth seemed to breathe heat and life, where children laughed as they chased goats down dusty roads, and where nights came with skies so dark and clear I felt I could touch the stars. Asia, too, had been a tapestry of discovery, bustling cities with neon veins, temples echoing with chants, and quiet mountain villages where I learned how silence itself could be a language. Every journey added something to me, something invisible but heavy, like the way sand slips into the seams of a shoe and never quite leaves. I was a collector, not of objects, but of moments, of faces, of stories. And still, despite everything I'd seen, there was a hunger in me that refused to be satisfied. That hunger is what brought me to the desert of Dubai. It wasn't on a plan or a checklist. It was impulse, a sudden craving for something vast and empty, a place where the world would strip me of noise and leave me with nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I had heard of the desert before, of course. Its golden dunes that stretched like endless waves. Its silence that could either comfort you or swallow you whole. That was what I wanted, to test myself against solitude. I arrived before sunset, when the sky was still painted with streaks of orange and crimson. The air was dry and heavy, brushing against my skin like warm breath. With practiced hands, I set up my small camp, just a simple tent, a sleeping mat, and a thin blanket. The sand shifted beneath my boots as I worked, sliding away as if reminding me that I was only a guest here. When I finished, I stood back and looked around. The dunes rose and fell in curves that seemed almost alive. There was no sign of life anywhere. No houses, no cars, not even a bird crossing the sky. For the first time in a long while, I was completely alone. My backpack held only the basics: water bottles, a few packets of dried food, and a flashlight. The food wasn't much, but I had grown used to making do with little. I tore open one packet and chewed slowly, the flavor bland, the texture dry. Still, I was grateful. As I ate, the desert began to change. The sun slid lower, and the shadows grew longer, softer, until the dunes seemed like the folds of a giant golden blanket being pulled over the earth. When the last light faded, the stars appeared, so many, so fierce in their brightness, that I forgot to swallow the food in my mouth. I leaned back against the cool sand, listening. At first, I thought the desert was silent, but after a while I realized it was not. The wind carried whispers, brushing over the dunes like fingers across a drum. My ears picked up the faint creak of the tent fabric, the shifting grains of sand as the wind moved them, even the soft rhythm of my own heart. It was a silence filled with tiny, fragile sounds. That night, loneliness and wonder warred inside me. There was an excitement, a thrill in knowing I was surrounded by nothing but nature's emptiness. But there was also a vulnerability that gnawed at me. What if something went wrong? What if I ran out of food or water? What if I simply vanished here, swallowed by the desert without anyone knowing? The thought sent a chill down my spine, but strangely, I did not want to leave. Fear and fascination often walk hand in hand, and I was caught in their embrace. I tried to sleep, curling inside my thin blanket, but my mind would not rest. The sand beneath me was firm yet shifting, as if I were lying on the back of some enormous sleeping creature. My stomach growled now and then, reminding me that I had eaten too little. Above me, the stars moved slowly, reminding me of time's endless march. I wonder about the people I had met on my travels. Faces I might never see again. Strangers who had left imprints on my life as fleeting as footsteps in sand. I thought about home, though I had not truly had one for years. Home, for me, was not a place but a feeling, a fleeting sense of warmth, of being anchored. Tonight, I felt the lack of it more than ever. The desert was beautiful, yes, but it did not anchor me. It unsettled me, reminding me that I was small, fragile, and temporary. And yet, lying there in the emptiness, I also felt alive in a way that only isolation can make you feel. As the hours stretched on, the temperature dropped. The desert is cruel that way, hot enough to burn you by day, cold enough to shiver your bones by night. I wrapped my arms around myself, exhaling clouds of white breath, and whispered into darkness as if the desert could hear me. I came here for solitude. Don't make me regret it. The desert, of course, gave no answer. Only the stars blinked back at me, indifferent witnesses to a wanderer's restless night. The night dragged on, each hour stretching like a long ribbon of silence. The stars above me seemed sharper than any I had ever seen, as though someone had polished them until they gleamed with unbearable clarity. The wind shifted, cool and restless, brushing against my tent and making the fabric whisper and sigh. I lay awake, eyes open, staring at the sky as though waiting for some answer written among the constellations. The desert had a way of stripping you down. It was not just the emptiness around me, but the weight of the silence that pressed against my chest. It made me feel like an intruder, like a man standing in a cathedral too vast for him to ever understand. I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, but each sound tugged me awake again. The rustle of sand, the faint groan of my tent rope, the softness of the wind. My body longed for rest, but my mind refused to surrender. It was some time past midnight when it happened. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The faint glow against the horizon, a sliver of light cutting through the dark. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, but then the glow grew brighter, larger, until the shape of headlights pierced through the endless dunes. My breath caught. A car, out here in the middle of nowhere? My first instinct wasn't relief. It was fear. My thoughts raced. Bandits? A patrol? Another traveler? The desert did not promise safety, and my loneliness suddenly felt like a shield that had been ripped away. The vehicle drew closer, its beams sweeping across the sand like searching eyes. I stood outside my tent, frozen between running and staying. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat loud enough to echo in my ears. The car slowed as it approached, finally rolling to a stop near my small camp. The lights dimmed, and in their place, a figure emerged. A tall man stepped out, dressed in traditional Arab robes that seemed to flow with the night wind. Even in the dim glow, he carried an aura of quiet authority, the kind of presence that demanded attention without a single word. He looked at me, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. His eyes were dark, steady, and when he spoke, his voice was low yet clear, carrying both confidence and warmth. "Are you all right?" he asked in English, his accent rich but precise. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. I gestured vaguely at my modest camp. Traveling." He stepped closer, studying me. The faint glow from the car lights cast shadows across his face, sharp and dignified. There was no aggression in his expression, only interest. "You are not from here," he said, though it was more observation than question. "I'm American," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tourists, exploring the world. But tonight," I laughed lightly, though it came out thin, "tonight I'm just trying to survive on very little food." At that, his lips curved into something between a smile and a knowing smirk. "The desert is no place to starve," he said. He glanced at my tent, at the meager supplies scattered nearby, and then back at me. "Come with me. My camp is not far. You will eat, and you will rest properly." His words were kind, but I felt the weight of them. I looked at my own little camp, my tent that seemed suddenly smaller, almost pathetic compared to the man who stood before me. My instincts warred again, caution against trust, independence against need. But the truth was my stomach ached, my body shivered from the cold, and something in his tone reassured me. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. I wouldn't want to intrude. He gave a quiet laugh, one that seemed to come more from his chest than his lips. "A guest is never an intrusion. You honor me by accepting." There was something almost regal in the way he said it, as though his hospitality was not a favor, but a duty he carried with pride. Against the backdrop of the desert, his presence seemed larger than life. I nodded, finally surrendering to his offer. I gathered a few belongings, my backpack, a blanket, and glanced one last time at my little camp. It had been enough for me, but now it looked fragile, insignificant, a child's attempt at survival in a land too vast to be conquered. As I turned toward his vehicle, I felt as though I was stepping into another world. The ride to his camp was short, but surreal. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating dunes that rose and fell like waves frozen in time. The silence between us was not awkward. It was charged, filled with an unspoken understanding. I stole glances at him, noting the calm with which he held himself, the effortless way he seemed at home in a place that made me feel so alien. When we arrived, I was struck dumb. His camp was nothing like mine. Where I had a single flimsy tent, he had an entire setup that looked like it belonged to another century, yet carried the luxuries of modern life. Large, ornate tents rose in the sand, their fabrics rich and colorful. Lanterns flickered at the entrances, casting warm golden glows. I could smell spices and roasted meat carried by the breeze, and hear faint music, like strings being plucked softly in the distance. I stepped out of the car, my mouth slightly open. The contrast hit me hard. My little patch of survival was gone, replaced by something that felt like a mirage made real. Servants moved quietly, tending to fires and arranging cushions around low tables. The Sheikh walked ahead with the ease of a man utterly comfortable in his world, then turned back to make sure I followed. "This," he said, his hand sweeping toward the tents, "is my night home when I come to the desert. You will rest here." I swallowed, still trying to absorb the richness of it all. "It's incredible I managed." He smiled faintly, as though he had heard that before, but still appreciated the awe in my voice. "Come," he said, "you will eat first." And so I followed him, leaving behind the fragile loneliness of my own camp, stepping into a night I could never have imagined. The moment I stepped into the Sheikh's camp, it felt like crossing a threshold into another world. The desert outside was vast and barren, stripped of all comforts. But here it was as if someone had painted warm color and life directly onto the sand. Large tents with high peaks swayed gently in the wind, stitched with intricate patterns that caught the flicker of lantern light. The air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb, spiced rice, and fresh bread, mingling with the subtle fragrance of oud that lingered on the Sheikh's robes. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of quiet luxury. Carpets with deep reds and golds softened the ground where the sand would have shifted underfoot. Cushions were scattered generously, piled high around low tables carved from dark wood. Servants moved with silent efficiency, their steps light, their eyes downcast, as if trained to keep the illusion that this place ran on magic rather than labor. I hesitated at the edge, overwhelmed by the richness of it all. My small tent and dry food felt like a memory belonging to another man, someone poorer, hungrier, smaller than the one who now stood here. My stomach growled, betraying me, and I flushed with embarrassment. The Sheikh must have heard it, because his lips curved into the faintest smile. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a cushion laid near the largest table. "You will eat as much as you wish. The desert is harsh, but it has no power here." I lowered myself onto the cushion, sinking into its softness. Almost instantly, a servant set a large silver platter in front of me, rice flecked with saffron, pieces of lamb so tender they fell apart with the slightest touch, bowls of hummus drizzled with golden olive oil, dates that glistened like gems, and flatbread still steaming. My hands hovered for a moment, uncertain if I should wait, but the Sheikh himself sat beside me, tearing a piece of bread and dipping it into hummus before nodding for me to do the same. The first bite was almost too much to bear. Warmth, spice, and richness exploded across my tongue, and I realized just how starved I had been. My throat tightened with gratitude. I ate carefully at first, but hunger took control, and soon I was eating with both hands, barely stopping to breathe between mouthfuls. The Sheikh did not mock me. On the contrary, he seemed pleased, his dark eyes soft as though watching a man being saved. "You travel far," he said after a while, tearing another piece of bread. His tone was calm, but there was curiosity beneath it. "Alone, in places where even my people do not always go." "Why?" I paused, wiping my hands on cloth, then met his gaze. "Because the world is too big to live only in one corner of it. I've seen cities that never sleep, villages where silence feels holy, oceans that stretch so wide they make you forget your name. I don't want to die without knowing what it all looks like, what it all feels like. He regarded me quietly, his head tilting slightly as though weighing my words. "And yet tonight," he said, "you nearly slept hungry and cold in the sand." I laughed, embarrassed, but nodded. That's part of it, too. Sometimes you trade comfort for experience. Sometimes the price is high. The Sheikh's eyes softened further, almost imperceptibly. And still you pay it. That is courage. The compliment struck deeper than I expected. It wasn't the kind of empty praise strangers sometimes offer. It felt deliberate, considered. I lowered my gaze, unsure how to respond, and reached for a date to fill the silence. Its sweetness burst in my mouth, sticky and rich, grounding me. "And you?" I asked after a moment, curious. "Why do you come here, to the desert, when you could live surrounded by luxury in the city?" He leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting past me, toward the dunes barely visible in the dark beyond the lanterns. "Because the desert reminds me of who I am. My family has lived with it for generations. My grandfather hunted here. My father, too. When I was a boy, I learned to track the gazelle, to read the wind, to survive with nothing but fire and water. The city offers comfort, but comfort makes men weak. Out here, the desert strips everything away. It is the great equalizer." His words carried a gravity that silenced me. I tried to imagine him, this man draped in wealth and power, wandering the dunes as a boy, learning survival in a place that would gladly swallow the unprepared. It made him seem less untouchable, more human, though still wrapped in an aura I couldn't quite name. "I think I understand," I said softly. "You don't come here to escape luxury. You come here to remember what's real." His eyes returned to mine, steady and piercing. "Yes," he said simply. "And you come to the desert for solitude. Yet tonight, solitude gave you hunger." The corner of his mouth twitched as if amused, and I found myself smiling back sheepishly. I guess I hadn't planned very well. "Perhaps," he said, then almost playfully, "but perhaps the desert planned better than you." I blinked, then chuckled, realizing what he meant. If not for my hunger, I would not have met him. The thought lingered, making the air between us feel different, charged in a way I couldn't yet explain. As the meal continued, our conversation wound gently through different subjects: his culture, the traditions of hospitality, stories of old hunts when falcons had been used instead of rifles. He spoke with pride, but also with a kind of reverence, as though his people's history lived inside him. I shared my own stories in return, of nights on trains across Europe, of sleeping under tin roofs in Africa, while rain hammered above me, of mountain paths in Asia that made my legs ache but my soul sing. He listened intently, never interrupting, and each time I finished, he gave a small nod as if acknowledging the truth of my journey. When I spoke of the loneliness that sometimes came with traveling, his gaze lingered on me a little longer, softer than before. "You carry the weight of freedom," he said quietly. "It is heavy, but it shines in your eyes." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, not just from the food or the fire, but from something in his tone. It wasn't just admiration, it was attention, focused and deliberate, and it left me a little unsteady. I looked down at my hands, realizing I was smiling. For the first time since I had arrived in the desert, I didn't feel like an intruder anymore. I felt seen. After the meal, warmth lingered in my stomach, soft and heavy, like a blanket wrapped around my insides. For the first time in hours, I felt full, safe, and strangely reluctant for the night to end. The Sheikh spoke a few words in Arabic, and the servants quietly began to withdraw, carrying dishes and extinguishing all but a handful of lanterns that cast soft amber glows across the carpets. The air grew quieter, more intimate. Only the desert wind hummed outside, brushing against the tent walls like a distant hand. When I made a motion toward my small blanket in the spot I assumed I'd be given to rest, the Sheikh stopped me with a gentle shake of his head. "No," he said firmly, though not unkindly. "You will not sleep there. You will sleep in my tent, beside me. The desert night is cold. Alone, it is harsher than you realize." I hesitated. His tent loomed larger than the others, its entrance lit by two lanterns that swayed gently in the wind. Part of me wanted to protest, to insist I'd be fine on my own. But another part, the part still aching with loneliness. Felt the pull of his offer. He seemed so certain, so assured, that refusing him felt almost like defying gravity. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. He gave a small smile, eyes glinting in the low light. "I do not make suggestions I do not mean. Come." So I followed him. Inside, the tent was breathtaking. The floor was layered with thick carpets, soft enough that my boots sank into them. Cushions were arranged around a central low table, and further back, separated by curtains of embroidered fabric, lay a wide bed covered in silk sheets that shimmered faintly under the lantern light. The air was fragrant with sandalwood, warm and heavy, as though designed to soothe and seduce in equal measure. I sat awkwardly on the edge of one cushion, unsure what to do with my hands, while he loosened the folds of his robe and settled gracefully across from me. The fire of formality seemed to dim in him now. He leaned back on one elbow, relaxed, watching me with an expression that was half amusement, half curiosity. "You still look tense," he said after a moment. "Is my hospitality making you nervous?" I laughed softly, rubbing the back of my neck. "I guess I'm not used to this. Luxury, attention. My nights usually end with a sleeping bag and the sound of mosquitoes." His laugh was deep, genuine, carrying warmth that filled the tent. "Then, perhaps tonight, we'll show you another side of the world. Not every journey must be rough to be real." The way he said it disarmed me. He spoke not like a man trying to impress, but like someone inviting me into a secret truth. We began to talk, lightly at first. Small jokes about my poor planning, his playful jabs at how quickly I devoured the food earlier. His laughter came easily, and I found myself laughing with him, forgetting for a moment that we were from such different worlds. But as the night stretched on, the space between us seemed to shrink. He shifted closer, inch by inch, with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew his presence carried gravity. I felt it, the pull of him, magnetic, impossible to ignore. His scent of oud and smoke hung between us, warm and intoxicating. My heart thudded, unsure if it was fear or something else. At one point, his knee brushed mine. I froze, every nerve sparking, but he only smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You travel far," he said softly, his voice lower now, intimate, "but you still carry innocence in your eyes. Do you know that?" The compliment caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, heat rose in my cheeks, and I glanced away, fumbling for composure. Then it happened. He leaned closer, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and his hand slipped, not forward, but upward, into the loose hem of my shirt. His fingers were warm, firm, brushing against the skin of my stomach with deliberate slowness. My breath hitched. "You are too cute," he murmured, his accent wrapping around the words like silk. "Too cute and yummy." The phrase struck me with a jolt of disbelief. It was so bold, so unexpected, that for a moment I simply stared at him, my body stiff, my mind blank. My first instinct was to pull back, to put distance between us. This was a man I had just met, a stranger who had swept into my night like a storm. My rational mind screamed caution, and yet there was no threat in his eyes, no force in his touch. His hand lingered, yes, but it did not clutch or demand. It caressed, exploring gently, almost reverently, as though he was asking without words. Inside me, confusion bloomed like fire. Part of me wanted to resist, to hold on to the independence I prided myself on. But another part, a quieter, deeper part, felt something else entirely. Curiosity, the thrill of surrendering, of letting go of control in a place where no one knew me, where I was unanchored, unjudged. The silence thickened. My breath grew uneven, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. His hand moved slowly upward, tracing the lines of my chest, and I did not stop him. My eyes met his, and I saw no cruelty there, only warmth. An invitation, not a demand. "Why me?" I whispered before I could stop myself. He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing my skin. "Because the desert gives what it chooses. Tonight, it gave me you." The words sank into me, strange and intoxicating, leaving me trembling with uncertainty. Should I resist? Should I surrender? I didn't know. All I knew was that my world, once so vast and untouchable, had narrowed down to the space inside this tent, to the man beside me, to the hand that lingered against my skin and the storm of questions that awakened inside me. For a moment, I was frozen in the haze of my own confusion, caught between instinct and desire. His hand, warm against my skin, did not push further. It lingered there, patient, waiting. That patience told me more than words could have. If he had pressed harder, I might have recoiled. Instead, I felt my guard slipping, like walls too long held up suddenly tired of standing. I realized then it wasn't fear that filled me. It was safety. His touch, though bold, wasn't rough or demanding. It carried the strange gentleness of someone used to command, yet careful when it mattered. I let out a shaky breath, lowering my gaze. "You don't even know me?" I whispered. His eyes softened. "Perhaps. But sometimes the desert shows us truths faster than years of friendship. You feel it too, don't you?" His words unsettled me, not because they were untrue, but because they touched something I hadn't admitted to myself. I nodded faintly. He withdrew his hand then, almost as if rewarding my honesty, and leaned back. The sudden absence of his touch left my skin tingling, my chest hollow with some strange ache. The silence stretched before he broke it, his voice quiet, thoughtful. "You look at me and see wealth, power, control. But do you know what you don't see? How empty it feels at times. My people obey me. They respect me. But respect is not the same as closeness. And obedience is not the same as love." His words struck me harder than I expected. In that moment, he wasn't the imposing figure who had appeared in the desert with headlights blazing. He wasn't the commanding host surrounded by servants and luxury. He was a man confessing his loneliness, peeling back a layer I hadn't imagined was there. I leaned forward, my voice quiet. "I think I know a little about that feeling. Not in the same way, but I've never really fit anywhere. Back home, I was always the odd one out. Traveling was my way of searching, I guess. Searching for meaning, for belonging. And yet, no matter how far I go, it still feels like something is missing." His eyes studied me in silence, deep and thoughtful, as if weighing my soul. "So you, too, are wandering the world not to escape, but to find?" "Yes." The word came out before I could second-guess it. Something shifted in the air between us. The earlier tension, charged with the pull of attraction, softened into something deeper. Understanding, recognition. Two strangers, from worlds apart, yet bound by the same invisible thread of longing. He reached for the small brass lantern between us and lowered its flame. The tent dimmed, the shadows lengthening, drawing us closer together. "Tell me," he said softly, "what is it you hope to find?" I hesitated. It was a question I had never been asked so plainly. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer. "Peace. A place where I don't have to keep proving myself. People who see me, not what I can give them. I want to feel at home, even if it's not where I was born." His expression softened further. "Strange," he murmured. "You describe what I desire too. All the gold, the tents, the feasts, they do not fill the emptiness. They cannot give me what I crave. A soul who looks past the titles, the wealth, the power, and simply sees me." For the first time since meeting him, I felt my chest loosen, as though some heavy weight was easing away. This was no longer about tents or luxury, not even about the brush of his hand against my skin. This was about truth, the raw, unpolished kind that only reveals itself in the quiet of night when masks fall away. I shifted closer, not out of surrender, but out of recognition. My shoulder brushed his arm lightly. He did not move away. Instead, he tilted his head, his gaze steady, but softer now, stripped of command. "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. I thought about it, really thought. A few hours ago, the idea would have been absurd. But here now, with the desert winds whispering outside and the lantern casting soft halos around us, I realized the answer. "Yes," I said, surprised at myself. "I think I do." The faintest smile touched his lips, one not of victory, but of relief. He placed his hand, not against my skin this time, but over mine. His palm was broad, warm, and steady. That is more precious to me than anything else you could have given. We sat like that in silence, hand in hand. The intimacy wasn't the touch itself, but in the stillness it created, the quiet pact it formed. My body no longer trembled with hesitation. Instead, warmth spread through me, not desire alone, but of care, understanding, something more enduring than fleeting attraction. He leaned closer, not rushing, not forcing. His forehead brushed against mine, a gesture so tender it made my eyes sting. No kiss, not yet. Just closeness, the kind that said more than words ever could. I closed my eyes, letting the moment wash over me. For once, I didn't feel out of place. For once, I felt seen, not as a wanderer, not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Perhaps the desert did not bring you to me by accident. Perhaps it brought us together because we are both searching for the same thing. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let myself lean into his presence, into the quiet warmth between us. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I wasn't searching. I was simply here. And in that moment, it was enough. The desert night seemed endless, yet for the first time since my journey began, I didn't feel lost in it. The silence outside the tent wasn't heavy anymore. It was soothing, like a blanket that wrapped around us, keeping the world at bay. Inside, the air felt warm, alive, charged not with fear, but with a quiet closeness that was harder to put into words than anything I had ever experienced. We didn't rush. That was what surprised me most. There was no urgency, no demand. He stayed close, his forehead still brushing mine, his hand resting over mine as though he were afraid that letting go would shatter the fragile truth we had uncovered. Slowly, cautiously, I lifted my other hand and placed it on his chest. I felt the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm, strong yet strangely vulnerable. He wasn't pretending to be invincible anymore. He was simply human. When he tilted his head slightly and pressed his lips against my temple, I didn't flinch. Instead, I felt a warmth spread through me, soft and disarming. It wasn't hunger or conquest. It was reassurance, a promise that whatever was unfolding between us wasn't built on force, but on choice. We lay down after that, side by side on the thick carpets and cushions that lined his tent. The lantern flickered low, throwing faint patterns across the fabric walls. I could still hear the desert wind outside, brushing against the canvas like a distant lullaby. He shifted closer, his arm finding its place around my shoulders, drawing me against him. My head rested against his chest, where the rhythm of his heartbeat filled the quiet. I had never thought a foreign land could feel like safety, yet in that moment, wrapped in his warmth, I felt steadier than I had in years. My body relaxed, my guard crumbled, and the loneliness I carried with me for so long began to ease. He whispered things, soft and unhurried, little fragments of his world. Stories of nights spent under stars as a boy, of his father teaching him the ways of the desert, of the silence that sometimes felt more like a friend than the people around him. His voice rumbled gently beneath my ear, and I found myself answering in kind, sharing pieces of my own journey. I spoke of my childhood, my restless spirit, my search for something unnamed. The more we spoke, the less it mattered where we came from or how different our lives were. What mattered was that, here in the middle of the desert, our paths had crossed. We were no longer two separate wanderers. We were companions, if only for the night, finding solace in each other. At some point, his fingers brushed my hair, a simple, absent-minded motion that nearly undid me. I wasn't used to being touched with such care, such gentleness. It stirred something I hadn't realized I was craving, not passion, but tenderness. When his lips finally found mine, it was unhurried, like the natural conclusion of everything we had said and felt. It wasn't a claim or a demand. It was a connection, soft, searching, filled with a promise of understanding rather than possession. My hand tightened against his chest, not to resist, but to hold on, to ground myself in the reality of what was happening. The kiss deepened only slightly before we broke apart, breath mingling in the narrow space between us. We didn't need more. The moment had already said everything. He smiled faintly, brushing his thumb against my cheek. "You were meant to be here tonight," he murmured. Maybe he was right. Or maybe it was just easier to believe it. All I knew was that in a life defined by movement and transience, this was the first time I wanted to stay still. We settled again, his arm pulling me closer until I was wrapped fully in his embrace. The warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart lulled me towards sleep. The desert silence stretched on, vast and eternal, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. For once, I wasn't staring into emptiness. I was sharing it. As my eyes drifted shut, I thought about how unexpected this was. I had come to the desert seeking adventure, solitude, maybe even answers. I never imagined I would find closeness in the form of a stranger, a man so different from me, yet carrying the same hunger for connection. I fell asleep with that thought, with his arms around me, with the soft desert night holding us both. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dream of leaving. I dreamed of staying. I woke to the faint glow of dawn pressing against the tent walls, a soft golden light filtering through the canvas. The desert, which had seemed so intimidating the night before, now felt gentle, almost welcoming. I shifted slightly, realizing I was still wrapped in the Sheikh's embrace. His breathing was steady, calm, the kind of rhythm that made it easy to forget the world outside even existed. For a while, I just lay there, listening to the desert waking up, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of a bird, the silence breaking softly into life. When I finally sat up, he stirred, opening his eyes with the unhurried calm of someone accustomed to greeting the day without rush. "You sleep well?" he asked, his voice husky with sleep. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. Better than I expected. Maybe better than I have in a long time. He chuckled softly, sitting up beside me. The tent flap was drawn open, and together we stepped outside. The desert stretched endless before us, bathed in the rising sun's amber glow. The dunes shimmered as though made of gold, shifting shapes beneath the sky. For a moment, I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a new world. Breakfast was already being prepared. Flatbreads warming over a fire, dates piled high on silver plates, steaming tea poured into delicate glasses. It wasn't just food. It was a ritual, a celebration of the morning. I ate with a hunger I hadn't felt the night before, laughing when he teased me for the way I devoured the bread. "You're like a man who hasn't seen food in days," he said, eyes glinting with humor. Well, I practically hadn't. I shot back, grinning. Last night was my rescue. We both laughed, the sound carrying lightly into the vast emptiness around us. For once, the desert didn't feel empty at all. It felt alive, filled with the warmth of shared laughter and simple companionship. As we finished, he leaned back against a cushion, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Dubai is more than skyscrapers and markets. There are hidden places, quiet corners of the city, stretches of desert where the stars feel close enough to touch, oases that carry stories older than empires. If you like, I could show them to you." I blinked, caught off guard by the offer. Part of me had expected our connection to end with the night, a fleeting memory to carry on my journey. But here he was extending something more. Not possession, not demand, an invitation. "I'd like that," I said quietly, sincerity threading every word. "More than you know." His smile was slow, genuine, and for a moment, I saw the man beyond the Sheikh, beyond the wealth and the power. I saw a companion, perhaps even a friend. As the sun rose higher, casting sharper light across the sand, I realized how changed I felt. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been a wanderer, tired and hungry, bracing myself against loneliness. Now, I stood in the desert with someone who had reminded me that connection was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. Later, when I packed my small bag and prepared to ride with him toward the city, I took one last look at the endless dunes. The desert had not only kept me alive, it had given me something unexpected, warmth, belonging, and a story I would carry forever. I whispered a silent thank you to the sands, to the silence, to the stars that had led him to me. Then I turned to follow him, stepping into the promise of new horizons.